They found Rose Hartwell on a Tuesday morning when the desert air still held the cool breath of night and the sun had barely crested the jagged horizon. Her body lay at the bottom of the dry well behind her farmhouse, twisted among the stones like a discarded prayer. The well had been empty for 20 years. Rose Hartwell had been afraid of water her entire life. Sheriff Ezekiel Voss stood at the edge, his weathered face catching the first amber light of dawn. He was 52 years old and had seen men die in every manner the Arizona Territory could devise: snakebite, heat stroke, bullets through the chest, knives between the ribs. But this was different. This was a woman who would cross the street to avoid a rain puddle, lying dead in the one place she would never go willingly. The deputy, a young man named Moss with eager eyes and clumsy hands, leaned too far over the edge. "Don't," Voss said. Moss pulled back. "Was it an accident, Sheriff?" Voss didn't answer. He climbed down into the well boots, finding purchase on stones that had gone untouched for decades. The air smelled of old earth and something else, something wrong. At the bottom, Rose Hartwell's hands were scraped raw fingernails, broken and bloody. She had clawed at the stone walls. She had tried to climb out. Voss crouched beside her, his knees protesting. Something glinted near her left hand. He picked it up carefully. A piece of paper folded small, soaked through with blood, but still readable. The words were written in Rose's shaking hand. "Tell Kimimila. They know about the spring." He read it twice, then looked up at the circle of sky above him. "Tell Kimimila." The name pulled at something in his memory, something old and dangerous. "Sheriff," Moss called down, "you find anything?" Voss folded the paper and slipped it into his vest pocket. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing at all." 40 miles southeast, where the land turned harder and the government had drawn lines, the wind ignored. Kimimila stood in the doorway of a small adobe house and watched a rider approach through the heat shimmer. She was 27 years old, lean as a cottonwood branch, with her mother's Apache cheekbones and her father's gray eyes. She wore traditional dress, but carried a leather satchel her father had given her when she was 12. The rider was a white man from the telegraph office in San Carlos, sweating through his shirt. "Message for Kimimila," he said, not meeting her eyes. She took the telegram. Her hands did not shake. She had learned long ago not to show weakness to men who looked through her instead of at her. The paper was thin, the words stark: "Rose Hartwell deceased. You are sole heir. Come immediately. Legal complications." She read it once, then again. The rider had already turned his horse. "How did she die?" Kimimila called after him. He didn't turn back. Didn't say. She watched him disappear into the desert, then looked down at the telegram again. Rose Hartwell, her aunt, the only white person who had ever called her family. An old man emerged from the house behind her. Chief Nahuel was 65, with silver hair, braided long, and eyes that had witnessed the surrender at Skeleton Canyon 3 years prior. He had watched Geronimo lay down his weapons. He had watched his people walk onto the reservation. He had watched the world change into something smaller and meaner. "You will go to Mesquite Springs." Kimimila folded the telegram. "I have no choice. She left me her land." Nahuel's face remained still, but something shifted behind his eyes. "That land is not a gift, Kimimila. It is a burden. Rose knew this. Now you will know it too." She looked at him, waiting. "Your father died for that land," Nahuel said quietly. "Your aunt spent 40 years protecting it, and now they send for you." He paused. "Be careful what you inherit." The memory came unbidden as she packed. She was 15 again, standing in front of Rose's farmhouse with a flour sack containing everything she owned. Rose had held her smelling of lavender and bread and said, "You will always have a home here." But 3 days later, men had come. A rancher named Drummond, thick around the middle, with a voice like a rock slide. Others behind him, hard-eyed and certain. "You can't keep an Apache here," Drummond had said. "They killed my son," Rose had argued. Kimimila remembered the way her aunt's voice had cracked, the way her hands had trembled. But in the end, Rose had taken Kimimila back to the reservation. "To protect you," Rose had whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Kimimila had not cried. She had learned by then that tears changed nothing. Now, 12 years later, she was going back. She arrived in Mesquite Springs as the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of rust and gold. The town was small, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a single dirt road like survivors of a shipwreck. The farmhouse sat at the edge where civilization gave way to open land. She could see it from half a mile away, lonely and waiting. As she rode closer, she noticed things were wrong. The windows had been replaced. The fence posts stood straight. Someone had been here. Someone had been inside. She dismounted and tied her horse. The front door was unlocked. The interior smelled of sawdust and soap. Rose's furniture remained, but everything was clean organized. Too clean. Someone had not just visited, someone had moved in. A sound from behind the house. Kimimila's hand went to the knife at her belt. She moved quietly to the back door and looked out. A man was repairing the fence, tall, somewhere in his 30s, with sun-darkened skin and work clothes that had seen better years. He moved with the steady rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times, driving nails with precise strikes. He didn't look up when she opened the door. "You're on my land," Kimimila said. The hammering stopped. The man set down his tools and finally turned to face her. His eyes were blue, startling against his tanned face. He showed no surprise at seeing an Apache woman, as if he had been expecting her. "Fixing a broken fence," he said. "If I don't, my cattle will wander through. Figured you'd rather have it fixed." "This isn't your land to fix." "I know." He picked up a piece of wood, examined it. "But if you're planning to stay, you'll need this fence solid, unless you like cows in your kitchen." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. No anger, no condescension, just stating what was. "You knew I was coming," Kimimila said. "Rose told me, before she died." The words hung in the air between them. Kimimila studied his face, looking for deception and finding only a kind of weathered sadness. "Rose didn't trust anyone in this town. Why would she tell you?" The man was quiet for a moment. Then he set down the wood and walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Because I'm the one who found her body." Kimimila felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "I'm Silas Grayson," he continued. "I ranched the land just south of here. My cattle stopped drinking from the creek 3 weeks ago, thought maybe the well was backed up, so I went to check." He paused. "Rose was at the bottom. I called the sheriff right away, but before that I saw something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of cloth, faded red and yellow, woven in a pattern Kimimila knew as well as her own heartbeat. Apache weaving, her mother's style. "This was near her body," Silas said, holding it out. "Rose told me once if anything happened to her, I should give this to you. She said you would understand." Kimimila took the cloth with shaking hands. It was a piece of her mother's dress, the one her mother had been wearing the day she died 15 years ago. Why had Rose kept it? Why had it been in the well? "I don't understand," she whispered. "Neither do I," Silas said. "But Rose was scared. The last time I saw her, 2 days before she died, she told me to watch out for you. She said people were going to come for the land. She said they would do anything to get it." A sound from the brush behind the house. Both of them turned. Kimimila's hand went to her knife again, but Silas stepped forward, blocking her. "Just sit down," he said quietly. "Don't spook her more." But it wasn't a horse. A boy emerged from behind the mesquite bushes, maybe 10 years old, with dark skin and darker eyes. Apache. He wore clothes 2 sizes too large and boots tied with string. "Tie in," Silas said, his voice gentler now. "I told you to wait at home." The boy tie-in looked at Kimimila with open curiosity. "I wanted to see her." Silas sighed, but there was no real anger in it. "This is Kimimila," he said to the boy. "She owns this land now." Tyan stepped closer, unafraid. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. Kimimila didn't know how to answer. She looked at Silas, questions forming. "Tyan's father was Kuruk," Silas explained. "A warrior. He saved my life 8 years ago during a raid. I was in the wrong place, wearing the wrong clothes. Soldiers thought I was Apache. Kuruk pulled me out of the line of fire." He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Kuruk died 2 years ago. Tuberculosis. Before he passed, he asked me to take care of his son." "You're raising an Apache boy," Kimimila said. "In a town that hates Apache." "Yes." "Why?" Silas looked at her directly. "Because Kuruk was my brother, not by blood, but by choice. And I don't abandon family." The simplicity of it struck her. No justification, no guilt, just a choice made and kept. Tyan tugged at Silas's sleeve. "Can I show her the horses?" "Later," Silas said. "Right now Kimimila needs to settle in." He turned back to her. "I know this is a lot. If you want me to leave, I'll go, but I promised Rose I'd make sure you were safe, at least for tonight." Kimimila looked at the farmhouse, at the fence Silas had been repairing at Tyan, watching her with hopeful eyes. She thought about the telegram, about the cloth from her mother's dress, about Rose dying in a well she would never have approached willingly. "Stay," she said finally, "but I want answers, all of them." "Fair enough," Silas said. That night, after Tyan had fallen asleep in the small room Silas had prepared for him, Kimimila and Silas sat at Rose's kitchen table. He made coffee in silence, the familiar ritual filling the uncomfortable spaces between strangers. "You want to know why the land matters," Silas said. It wasn't a question. "My aunt wrote me a letter. 3 weeks ago. She said something was beneath the land, something they wanted to take." Silas nodded slowly. He pulled out an old folded map and spread it on the table. The paper was yellowed, the lines hand-drawn. "Not gold," he said. "Water." He pointed to a spot on the map directly beneath Rose's farmhouse. 60 feet down, there's an underground spring, the only freshwater source for 20 miles that isn't alkaline. Your grandfather Rose's father was a geologist. He mapped this 40 years ago. Rose inherited the knowledge and the burden. Someone wants it. Not someone. A group. They call themselves the Mesquite Water Consortium. 6 ranchers led by a man named Thaddeus Drummond. Kimimila's breath caught. Drummond, the man who had forced Rose to send her away. "What do they want?" she asked, though she already knew. "Control," Silas said. "They want to buy all the land from here to the reservation border. Once they control the water, they can sell it to the railroad companies, the mining operations, charge whatever they want." He paused. Rose refused to sell. More than that, she was planning to share the water freely, with everyone. Apache small ranchers, farmers. If she did that, the consortium's plan would collapse. And now she's dead. Yes. Kimimila looked at Silas across the table. The lamplight carved shadows on his face. "Which side are you on?" The question hung heavy. Silas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I was a member of the consortium. 3 years ago, when Drummond formed it, he invited me. I said yes." He met her eyes. "I thought it was progress, development, but I was wrong. They don't care about building anything. They only want money, and they'll do anything to get it. Including murder. I don't know for certain, but I suspect. That's why I left the consortium last year, and that's why they hate me now." Kimimila studied him, looking for lies and finding only regret. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," Silas said simply. "Not yet." But Rose did, and she was nobody's fool. He stood and walked to a shelf, retrieving something wrapped in cloth. When he returned, he laid it on the table and unwrapped it carefully. A photograph, faded. A younger Silas standing beside an Apache woman and a small girl. "My wife," he said quietly. "Aita, my daughter." Mourning dove. 5 years ago there was a raid. Military targeting an Apache village near the border, based on intelligence. His jaw tightened. That intelligence came from someone in the consortium. They wanted the army to clear Apache from land near a water source. His voice went flat, empty. Aita and Mourning Dove were in that village. I was in town buying medicine. I couldn't get back in time. He touched the photograph gently. When I found out the truth, I confronted Drummond. He denied it, but I knew he was lying. I left the consortium that day. Kimimila looked at the photograph. The woman Aita had kind eyes. The little girl was maybe 4, smiling at something beyond the frame. "I'm sorry," Kimimila said, and meant it. "Me too." They sat in silence. The kind of silence that forms between people who have both lost too much. Finally, Kimimila spoke. "You're raising your friend's Apache son. You're helping me, an Apache woman. You're fighting against your own people." "Why?" Silas looked out the window at the darkness beyond. "I'm tired of choosing sides. I just want to choose what's right." Kimimila placed her hand on the table near his, but not touching. A small gesture, but it carried weight. "I understand," she said. She woke before dawn to the sound of horses, 3 of them moving slowly past the farmhouse. Kimimila went to the window and saw riders silhouetted against the gray light. They didn't stop, but one of them turned his head, looking directly at the house. Then they were gone. Silas was already awake, standing in the kitchen with coffee. "You saw them," he said. "Who were they?" "Consortium men, making sure you know you're being watched." Kimimila's hands curled into fists. Anger, hot and familiar, rose in her chest. "I'm not afraid of them." "You should be. They killed Rose. They'll kill you too if you get in their way." "Then I'll make sure I'm not an easy target." Silas almost smiled. "Rose said you were stubborn." Rose was right. Tyan emerged from his room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked small in the morning light, vulnerable. Silas went to him, checking his temperature with the back of his hand. "You feeling okay?" "I'm fine," Tyan said, but there was a tightness around his eyes. "Go wash up," Silas told him gently. "Then we'll eat." After Tyan left, Silas turned back to Kimimila. "The consortium will try to scare you off first. Threats, intimidation. If that doesn't work, they'll get creative." He paused. "You need to decide if this land is worth dying for." "My father died for it," Kimimila said. "My aunt died for it. I'm not running." "Your father?" Silas frowned. "I thought he died in a hunting accident." "That's what everyone thought." Kimimila went to her bag and pulled out the letter Rose had sent 3 weeks ago, the one that had made her pack her belongings before the telegram arrived. "Read it," she said, handing it to Silas. He unfolded the paper carefully. Rose's handwriting was shaky but clear. "Kimimila, I found evidence about your father's death. It wasn't an accident. I know who was responsible. Come home. I'll tell you everything." Silas looked up, understanding dawning. "But she died before you could get here." "Yes." "And you think her death and your father's death are connected." "I know they are." The morning stretched into afternoon. Silas worked on the fence while Kimimila explored the farmhouse, looking for anything Rose might have hidden. She found boxes of papers, old receipts, land deeds, nothing that explained why her aunt had kept a piece of her mother's dress for 15 years. In the back of a closet, beneath a pile of quilts, she found a wooden box, locked. She brought it to the kitchen table and used her knife to pry it open. Inside, more papers. But these were different. Official documents from the Territorial Land Office. She spread them out, reading quickly. Her breath stopped. 30 years ago, her father, Samuel Wade, had purchased this farmhouse and the surrounding land. But the deed showed something else. The land wasn't purchased for himself. It was purchased in trust for the Apache band her mother belonged to. A neutral zone where Apache and whites could trade peacefully. But before the plan could be implemented, Samuel Wade had died in a hunting accident. Rose, his sister, had inherited the land and tried to continue his work. Kimimila's hands shook as she read. Her father hadn't just been a trader. He'd been trying to build something, a bridge between 2 worlds, and someone had killed him for it. She looked up to find Silas standing in the doorway, Tyan beside him. "We need to go into town," Silas said. "Pick up supplies. You should come. Better if people see you're not hiding." Kimimila wanted to refuse, but she knew he was right. If she stayed hidden, it would look like fear. And fear was blood in the water. "All right," she said. They took Silas's wagon. Tyan sat between them, unusually quiet. As they approached Mesquite Springs, Kimimila felt eyes on her from every window, every doorway. The town remembered her, and it had not forgiven her for being born. At the general store, the clerk, a thin man with nervous hands, refused to meet her gaze. "We're closed," he said. "Your sign says open," Silas pointed out. "Closed to her kind." Silas's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Kimimila put a hand on his arm. "It's fine," she said quietly. "We'll go elsewhere." They returned to the wagon. A small crowd had gathered across the street watching. One of them, a woman in a faded blue dress, spat on the ground as they passed. Tyan pressed closer to Silas. "Why do they hate us?" he asked. Silas didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Because hate is easier than understanding." That night Kimimila couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch listening to the desert breathe. The stars were dense overhead, familiar constellations her mother had taught her to read, the sound of footsteps. Silas emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you might want company," he said. She took the cup gratefully. They sat in silence for a while, watching the darkness. "Tell me about your mother," Silas said. Kimimila was surprised by the question. No one ever asked about her mother. "She was strong," Kimimila said finally. "She taught me to track to find water, to read the land. She said the earth would always tell you what you needed to know if you listened." She paused. "She died when I was 12. Fever. The reservation doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think it was heartbreak. She missed the old ways, the freedom." "Rose talked about her sometimes," Silas said. "Said she was the bravest woman she'd ever known, marrying a white man living between 2 worlds. Rose admired that." "It killed her," Kimimila said quietly. "Maybe, but she also gave you life, taught you to survive in both worlds. That's a gift." Kimimila looked at him, this white man who spoke of Apache women with respect, who raised an Apache child, who had loved an Apache wife. "You're not like the others," she said. "Neither are you." Something passed between them then. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. 2 people who didn't fit anywhere, finding unexpected common ground. The next morning, Kimimila found it, a piece of paper folded small wedged under the front door. Not delivered by hand, thrown. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was crude, the letters uneven. "Leave Mesquite Springs in 7 days. If you don't, the Apache boy living with Grayson will disappear, just like your mother disappeared." Kimimila read it twice. The threat against Tyan made her blood run cold. But it was the last line that stopped her breath. "Just like your mother disappeared." Her mother hadn't disappeared. She had died of fever on the reservation surrounded by her people. Everyone knew that, unless they didn't. She looked out at the desert, at the vast emptiness that could swallow secrets whole. Her father's death called an accident. Her mother's death called fever. Rose's death called a fall. How many lies had she been living with? She heard Silas and Tyan inside, their voices carrying through the window. Silas was teaching the boy how to mend a saddle, their conversation easy and warm. Tyan laughed at something, a bright sound in the morning air. Kimimila folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She wouldn't show it to Silas. Not yet. Because showing him would mean admitting she was scared, and she couldn't afford to be scared. She had 7 days to find out who killed her aunt. 7 days to discover the truth about her mother. 7 days to decide if this land was worth dying for. She looked down at the piece of cloth in her other hand, her mother's dress pulled from a well where her aunt had died. The dead were trying to tell her something, and she was finally ready to listen. The week that followed moved like water over stone, slow, relentless, wearing everything down to its essential shape. Kimimila kept the threatening letter hidden in her pocket, the paper growing soft from being touched too many times. Each morning she woke to find Silas already working repairing something new on the farmhouse. A loose board, a broken shutter, the stone foundation that had begun to crack. He moved through these tasks with quiet determination, never asking permission, never expecting thanks. She should have been grateful. Instead, she found herself watching him with suspicion that grew like frost on winter glass. On the third day, she confronted him about it. They were working together to repair the irrigation channel that ran from the underground spring to the small vegetable garden behind the house. The channel was old, built by Rose's father decades ago, and the wooden slats had rotted through in places. Silas worked on one end, Kimimila on the other, Tyan running between them with tools and nails. "You don't have to keep fixing things," Kimimila said, hammering a new board into place. Silas looked up, squinting against the sun. "The work needs doing. It's not your work. Someone has to do it." She set down her hammer. "Why are you really here, Silas? What do you want?" The question hung between them. Tyan had stopped moving, sensing the shift in tone. Silas straightened slowly, his back protesting. "I told you already. You told me Rose asked you to watch over me. But Rose is dead. You don't owe her anything anymore." "I owe her everything," Silas said quietly. "She was the only person in this town who didn't turn her back on me after Aida died. When everyone else crossed the street to avoid me, Rose brought me food, checked on Tyan, reminded me I was still human." He paused. "So yes, I owe her, and I keep my debts." Kimimila wanted to believe him, but belief was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I'm going into town," she said, "to talk to Sheriff Voss about Rose's death, alone." Silas's jaw tightened. "That's not smart." "I don't remember asking for your opinion. The sheriff won't listen to you. You're Apache. In his eyes, that makes you either a liar or invisible." "Then I'll make him see me." "Kimimila." Silas stepped toward her. "You can't just demand answers from these people. They don't work that way. You need evidence first, proof. Otherwise, you're just another Apache making wild accusations against upstanding white citizens." The words stung because they were true. Kimimila felt anger rise hot in her throat. "So what do you suggest? That I just sit here and wait for them to come kill me too? No, I suggest you be smart about this, strategic. We need to gather information quietly, find out what the consortium is planning, build a case before we make accusations." Kimimila shook her head. "This isn't your fight. It is now. Why? Because you feel guilty about your dead Apache wife, because you think saving me will somehow make up for not saving her." The words came out harsher than she intended. Silas flinched as if she'd struck him. Tyan made a small sound of distress. Silas's voice when he spoke was very quiet. "That was cruel." Kimimila knew it was. She also knew cruelty was sometimes necessary. Keep people at a distance. Don't let them close enough to hurt you. It was a lesson she'd learned young and learned well. "I'm going to town," she said again. "Stay here with Tyan." She walked away before Silas could respond, before she could see the hurt in his eyes, before she could apologize. Mesquite Springs looked different in daylight, smaller, meaner. The buildings hunched together like conspirators, and the few people on the street moved quickly, heads down, as if afraid of being noticed. Sheriff Voss's office sat at the end of Main Street, a squat adobe building with barred windows. Kimimila tied her horse outside and pushed through the door. Voss was sitting behind a scarred wooden desk reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Miss Kimimila," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "didn't expect to see you here. I want to know how my aunt died." Voss set down the paper slowly. "I told Grayson already. She fell into the well. Tragic accident. Rose was afraid of water. She would never go near that well. People do strange things when they get old. Maybe she got confused, disoriented." "Her fingernails were broken," Kimimila said. "She tried to climb out. That's not confusion. That's someone fighting for their life." Voss's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. You calling this a murder? I'm asking questions. Questions that sound a lot like accusations. He leaned back in his chair. See, here's the problem. You come into my office making claims about good Christian folk in this town, claims you can't prove. That makes people nervous. And when people get nervous, they do things they might regret. The threat was clear. Kimimila held his gaze. Are you going to investigate my aunt's death properly, or are you going to pretend it was an accident? I investigated, found nothing suspicious, case closed. Then you're either incompetent or corrupt. Voss stood up slowly. He was a big man, built like a barn door, and he used his size deliberately. I think you should leave now, he said, before I arrest you for disturbing the peace. Kimimila didn't move. My aunt wrote me a letter before she died. She said she knew who killed my father 30 years ago. She was going to tell me everything. She paused. 2 days later, she was dead. You don't find that suspicious? Something changed in Voss's face, a tightening around the mouth. He knew something. Kimimila was sure of it. Your father died in a hunting accident, Voss said. Everyone knows that. Everyone is wrong. They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Voss sat back down. Leave it alone, he said quietly. Whatever you think you know, let it go, for your own safety. Is that a threat? It's advice. Good advice. He picked up his newspaper again, a clear dismissal. Now get out of my office. She was halfway back to the farmhouse when she saw them, 3 riders moving parallel to the road about 100 yards out. They made no effort to hide no pretense of coincidence. They were following her. Kimimila kept her horse at a steady pace, refusing to show fear, but her hand rested on the knife at her belt, and her eyes tracked every movement. The riders stayed with her until she reached the property line. Then they turned and rode away, their message delivered. You are being watched. You are not safe. Silas was waiting on the porch when she arrived. He said nothing as she dismounted, but his eyes scanned her face, her posture checking for injury. They followed me, she said. I know. I saw them from the ridge. He paused. Did Voss tell you anything useful? He told me to leave it alone, which means he knows something, or he's hiding something. Silas nodded slowly. There's something I need to tell you. I wasn't sure before, but after what you just said. He gestured toward the house. Come in, In the kitchen, Tyen was making bread, his small hands kneading dough with fierce concentration. He looked up when they entered, his face brightening. I'm making Rose's recipe, he announced proudly. Silas taught me. It looks good, Kimimila said, and meant it. Silas waited until Tyen was absorbed in his work again, then spoke quietly. I've been gathering information, carefully. There's a man used to work for the consortium, name's Garrett Webb. He left 6 months ago after a falling out with Drummond. He knows things about how the consortium operates. And he's willing to talk for a price. Kimimila's suspicion flared. How much? $500. That's a fortune. It's also potentially the evidence we need to prove the consortium is breaking the law. Fraud, intimidation, maybe worse. Kimimila studied Silas's face. When did you arrange this? 2 days ago. 2 days ago. Her voice went flat. And you're just telling me now. I wanted to make sure he was legitimate first, that he wasn't setting a trap. Or maybe you wanted to control the information, keep me dependent on you. Silas's patience, which had been steady all week, finally cracked. You think I'm trying to manipulate you? After everything I've done, I think you're a white man with secrets. I think you were part of the consortium. I think maybe you never really left. The accusation landed like a blow. Silas's face went very still. Is that what you believe? I don't know what to believe. He turned away, bracing his hands on the counter. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. The meeting with Webb is tonight, midnight. Old church on the edge of town. You can come or not, your choice. But I'm going with or without you. Why midnight? Why secret? Because Webb is scared. The consortium has eyes everywhere. If they know he's talking to us, he's a dead man. Kimimila wanted to argue, but the logic held. If Webb had information worth $500, it was dangerous information, the kind that got people killed. "I'm coming," she said. "Fine." They didn't speak for the rest of the afternoon. Tyan felt the tension and grew quiet, his usual chatter fading into watchful silence. At dinner, they ate without conversation, the only sounds the scrape of forks on plates and the distant call of coyotes. That night, after Tyan had gone to bed, Kimimila stood in her room and checked her knife. The blade was sharp, recently honed. She slipped it into her belt and pulled on a dark jacket. A soft knock on her door. "It's time," Silas said. They rode in silence, their horses picking careful paths through the darkness. The moon was a thin slice offering little light. Mesquite Springs was quiet, most windows dark. Only the saloon showed signs of life, yellow light, and rough laughter spilling into the street. The old church sat at the far end of town, abandoned years ago when a new one was built. Its adobe walls were crumbling, the wooden cross above the door tilted at a drunken angle. Silas dismounted first, scanning the area. "Webb should be inside," he said quietly. They approached carefully. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside the church was empty of pews, stripped bare, except for debris and animal droppings. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, creating pools of silver on the earthen floor. A figure moved in the shadows. "Grayson," a man's voice, nervous and thin. "Webb, I brought someone. Kimimila, Rose's niece." The man stepped into a shaft of moonlight. Garrett Webb was maybe 40, with a drinker's broken veins on his nose and hands that wouldn't stop moving. He looked at Kimimila with obvious discomfort. "An Apache. You didn't say nothing about bringing an Apache." "Does it matter?" Silas asked. "Matters to some folks." "We're not some folks. Do you have the information or not?" Webb licked his lips. "You got the money." Silas pulled out a leather pouch and tossed it to Webb, who caught it and immediately began counting. Kimimila watched her unease growing. Something felt wrong. The way Webb's eyes kept darting to the door, the way his hands shook. "Webb," she said quietly, "who else knows about this meeting?" "Nobody, I swear." "You're lying." "I ain't." The gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Webb's chest erupted in red. He made a choking sound and fell forward. Silas grabbed Kimimila and pulled her behind a section of crumbling wall as two more shots rang out, bullets thudding into adobe. She could hear his heartbeat rapid against her back, could smell gunpowder and fear. "Stay down," he hissed. More shots, then silence. Footsteps running, fading. The sound of a horse galloping away. They waited, counting breaths. Finally, Silas peered around the wall. "They're gone." Kimimila moved to Webb's body. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. The money pouch lay beside him untouched. This wasn't robbery. This was silencing. "We need to leave," Silas said. "Now, before someone comes." But Kimimila was already checking Webb's pockets. She found nothing except a folded piece of paper. She opened it quickly. A list of names, 6 of them, all members of the consortium, and beside each name a number. "What is it?" Silas asked. "Payment records." Webb was documenting bribes. She looked up at him. "This is what they killed him for." A sound outside, voices, coming closer. They ran, leaving Webb's body behind, racing through the back of the church and into the desert. Kimimila's horse was where they'd left it, but Silas's was gone, likely spooked by the gunshots. "Ride," Silas said. "I'll follow on foot." "No." Kimimila held out her hand. "Get on." He hesitated only a moment before swinging up behind her. She dug her heels in, and the horse leaped forward into the darkness. Behind them, shouts, the sound of pursuit. But her horse was fast, Apache trained, and she knew these trails better than any white man. They disappeared into the night like smoke. They didn't stop until they reached the farmhouse. Both of them were breathing hard, covered in dust and fear. Tyan appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What happened?" "Nothing," Silas said quickly. "Go back to bed." But Tyan had seen too much violence in his short life to be fooled. His eyes found the blood on Silas's sleeve, the wild look in Kimimila's eyes. "You're hurt," he said to Silas. "Just a scratch. From a branch." It wasn't. Kimimila could see the dark stain spreading. One of the bullets had grazed him. "Inside," she ordered. "Both of you." She lit lamps and made Silas sit while she examined the wound. It wasn't deep, but it needed cleaning. Tyan brought water and cloth without being asked, his small face pinched with worry. As Kimimila worked, Silas told her what he'd seen before the shooting started. The shooter was on the roof, single person, I think. They knew exactly where to aim. He winced as she cleaned the wound. This was planned. Webb was bait. To draw us out, maybe, or to kill two birds with one stone, get rid of Webb and frame us for it. Kimimila's hands stilled. "They'll say we killed him, an Apache woman and a consortium traitor, perfect suspects. We have the payment records. That proves motive. It proves Webb had motive to betray the consortium. It doesn't prove they killed him." She tied off the bandage. "We're in trouble, Silas." He looked at her, and for a moment the walls between them crumbled. They were just two people caught in something bigger than either of them, trying not to drown. "We'll figure it out," he said. Tyan climbed into Silas's lap, careful of the injured arm. "I don't want you to die," the boy whispered. Silas held him close. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." It was a promise he had no right to make. But Kimimila understood why he made it anyway. Some lies were necessary. Some hope was worth believing in, even when you knew better. The next morning brought news that spread through Mesquite Springs like wildfire. Garrett Webb found dead in the old church, murder. The sheriff was looking for suspects. They learned this from a rancher who stopped by ostensibly to check on fences, but really to deliver a message from the town. His name was Henry Pike, an older man with kind eyes and a careful way of speaking. "Just thought you should know," Pike said, standing in the yard, hat in hands. "Voss is saying it was Apache raiders. Says they're getting bolder coming into town now." "There were no Apache raiders," Kimimila said flatly. Pike looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "I know that. You know that. But Voss needs someone to blame, and Apache are convenient." He paused. "There's going to be trouble. Talk of forming a posse, going out to the reservation." Silas swore under his breath. "They're using this as an excuse. Seems like," Pike agreed. He looked at Kimimila. "You should know not everyone in town agrees with Drummond and his people. Some of us remember when Rose was alive, how she helped folks without asking for nothing in return. We know you're her blood. That counts for something. Not enough to stop a lynch mob," Kimimila said. "No," Pike admitted. "Probably not. But enough that I'm telling you this. Be careful. Watch your back. And if you need help," he trailed off, uncertain how to finish. "Thank you," Silas said. After Pike left Kimimila, and Silas stood in silence watching dust devils spiral across the desert. "This is my fault," Silas said finally. "I pushed for the meeting with Webb. If I just—" "Don't," Kimimila interrupted. "We both went. We both took the risk. But I'm the one who knew Webb. I'm the one who arranged it." She turned to look at him. This man who carried guilt like other men carried tools. Always there, always heavy, never set down. "Silas, stop trying to take responsibility for everything. Sometimes bad things just happen." "Do they? Or do they happen because people make them happen?" Before she could answer, Tyan came running from the house waving a piece of paper. "Someone left this," he said, breathless. "On the porch." Kimimila took it. Another note, but this one was different. Better handwriting, official paper. "Town meeting," she read aloud. "Tonight, 7 o'clock. To discuss recent criminal activity and necessary protective measures. All landowners required to attend." "It's a trap," Silas said. "Of course it's a trap, but if I don't go, they'll say I'm guilty, that I'm hiding. And if you do go, then at least I face them on my terms." Silas shook his head. "This is exactly what they want. To get you in front of a hostile crowd. make an example of you. Then what do you suggest? He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. We go together, you, me, and Tyan. We walk in like we have every right to be there, because we do. They'll tear us apart. Maybe. Or maybe seeing a child will remind them they're supposed to be human. It was a terrible plan. But Kimimila couldn't think of a better one. The town meeting was held in the largest building in Mesquite Springs, a combination church and community hall with rough wooden benches and a raised platform at one end. By the time they arrived, the room was already packed. 50 people, maybe more, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Conversation died when Kimimila walked through the door. Every eye turned to her. She felt Tyan press closer to Silas, felt her own heart hammering. But she kept her chin up, her expression neutral. They took seats in the back. No one sat near them. The empty space around them was deliberate, a physical manifestation of isolation. Thaddeus Drummond stood at the front of the room, massive and commanding, in his finest suit. He waited for complete silence before speaking. "Folks, we got ourselves a situation," he began, his voice carrying easily. "Last night, a good man was murdered in cold blood, Garrett Webb. Some of you knew him. He had his troubles, sure, but he didn't deserve to die like a dog in that old church." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Now the sheriff is investigating, but we all know what we're dealing with. Apache violence. They're getting bold, coming right into town, killing our people." Kimimila felt Silas tense beside her, but she put a hand on his arm. "Wait. We've been patient," Drummond continued. "We've tried to live peaceful, but there comes a time when patience becomes weakness, when we got to protect our own." A man in the front row stood up. "What are you proposing, Drummond?" "I'm proposing we send a message, clear and loud, that this kind of savagery won't be tolerated." He paused for effect. "I'm proposing we write out to the reservation, demand they hand over whoever killed Webb, and if they don't, he let the sentence hang." The room erupted in voices, some shouting agreement, others calling for caution. In the chaos, Sheriff Voss stood and raised his hands for quiet. "Now hold on," he said. "We can't just go riding onto reservation land. That's federal jurisdiction. We'd be breaking the law." "The law?" someone shouted. "The law didn't stop them from killing Webb." "We don't know Apache killed Webb," Voss said, and Kimimila was surprised to hear a note of reason in his voice. "Could have been anyone." "Like who?" Drummond challenged. "Who else would have reason?" In the back row, Silas stood up. The room fell silent again. "Garrett Webb used to work for your consortium," Silas said, his voice steady and clear. "He left 6 months ago, had a falling out with you. Isn't that right, Drummond?" Drummond's face darkened. "What are you implying, Grayson?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Webb knew things about the consortium, things you wouldn't want made public. Maybe someone wanted to keep him quiet." The temperature in the room changed. People shifted, uncomfortable. Drummond took a step forward. "You calling me a murderer? I'm saying we should look at all possibilities before we go blaming Apache for every crime that happens." "Of course you'd say that," Drummond sneered. "You're sleeping with one." The words hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Kimimila felt heat rise in her face, but before she could respond, Silas spoke again. "Rose Hartwell was murdered 3 weeks ago, found at the bottom of a well she was terrified of. No investigation, no justice. Just called it an accident and moved on." He looked around the room. Why? Because she was planning to share water from the spring under her land. Free water. For everyone. Apache and white alike. And that threatened the consortium's plans to monopolize it. "That's a lie," Drummond shouted. "Is it? Then why did you offer to buy her land 12 times in the last year? Why did you threaten to—" "Enough," Voss stepped between them. "This isn't helping anyone." But Kimimila was watching the faces in the crowd. Some looked angry, yes, but others looked thoughtful, uncertain. Seeds of doubt were being planted. She stood up and immediately regretted it when all eyes turned to her. My name is Kimimila, she said, her voice quieter than Silas's but carrying nonetheless. I'm Rose Hartwell's niece. Rose was my family, the only white person who ever treated me like I was human. She didn't deserve to die, and neither did Garrett Webb. She paused. I don't know who killed them, but I know it wasn't Apache raiders, and I know that blaming us is easier than looking for the real truth. Get out, Drummond said. This is a public meeting. I have every right. You have no rights here. You're not even a citizen. You're reservation Apache, and you need to get back where you belong before something happens to you. The threat was clear. Kimimila felt Tyen's small hand slip into hers. Silas stepped forward, positioning himself between Kimimila and Drummond. She's staying, he said quietly. And so am I. For a moment it looked like Drummond might swing. His fists clenched, his face purple with rage, but Voss put a hand on his shoulder. Let it go, the sheriff said. This isn't the time. Drummond shook him off but stepped back. Meeting adjourned, he announced. We'll discuss this more tomorrow, without outsiders. The crowd began to disperse, people filing out quickly, avoiding eye contact with Kimimila. But as they walked toward the door, an old woman approached. She had white hair and a face like crumpled paper. Miss Kimimila, she said softly. Kimimila stopped. I'm Opal Yates. I used to work for your aunt, helped her with the house. I remember, Kimimila said, though she didn't. She'd been too young when she last lived here. Mrs. Yates glanced around nervously. I need to speak with you, privately. It's about Rose. Kimimila's heart quickened. What about her? Not here, tonight. Meet me at the old church. Midnight. She pressed something into Kimimila's hand. This is Rose's. She wanted you to have it. Before Kimimila could respond, Mrs. Yates hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. Kimimila looked down at what she'd been given. A small key. Tarnished brass. What is it? Silas asked. I don't know, but Mrs. Yates wants to meet. She says she has information about Rose. At the church where Webb was killed. Yes. Silas's face was grim. It's another trap. Maybe. Or maybe she actually knows something. Either way, you're not going alone. They argued about it all the way back to the farmhouse, voices rising in the darkness. Tyen sat between them on the wagon, silent and worried. You can't keep trying to protect me, Kimimila said. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but that doesn't mean you should have to. That's not your decision to make. Kimimila, just sit down, Silas. She used his own phrase against him, her voice sharp. Stop trying to control everything. He fell silent. When they reached the farmhouse, he helped Tyen down from the wagon without a word, then walked inside without looking back. Kimimila stood alone in the yard, anger and guilt warring in her chest. She knew she was being unfair. Silas was only trying to help. But accepting help meant admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability meant people could hurt you. Better to push him away first. At 11:30 that night, Kimimila saddled her horse quietly. She'd wait until midnight, give Mrs. Yates time to arrive first. The key was in her pocket, heavy with possibility. She was checking her knife when Tyen appeared in the barn doorway, a small shadow in his nightshirt. You're leaving, he said. Not a question. Just for a little while. You're going to get hurt. I'll be careful. Tyen walked closer, his face serious beyond his years. Everyone says that. Everyone who leaves says they'll be careful. They'll come back, but they don't. My father said that. My mother said that. They're all gone. Kimimila knelt down to his level. Tyen, if you die, Silas will be sad. He's already sad all the time, but he tries to hide it. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. The boy's voice cracked. Please don't make him sadder. The words hit harder than any accusation. Kimimila pulled Tyen into a hug, feeling his small body shake with suppressed tears. I promise I'll come back, she said, knowing it was the same empty promise everyone made. But sometimes empty promises were all you had. The old church looked different at night, more menacing. Shadows pooled in corners, and the wind through the broken roof made sounds like whispered warnings. Kimimila tied her horse at a distance and approached on foot, every sense alert. The door was open. Inside, a single lantern burned, casting wavering light. Mrs. Yates, no answer. Kimmy stepped inside, hand on her knife. A figure moved in the shadows. Mrs. Yates emerged, clutching something to her chest. A book. Leather, bound old. "You came," the old woman breathed. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you have?" "Rose's diary. She kept it hidden at my house. Didn't trust keeping it at her own place." Mrs. Yates held it out with shaking hands. "She wrote everything. Who threatened her, who she suspected, including," she paused, "including who killed her." Kimmy took the diary, her hands trembling. She opened to the last entry, dated 2 days before Rose's death. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "I know the truth now. The person in the consortium isn't who I thought. Not Drummond. Someone I never suspected. Someone who's been close to me. Someone I trusted. I have to tell Kimmy, but I'm afraid if I write it in a letter, they'll intercept it. I need to wait until she comes home. But if something happens to me before then, if I die before I can tell her, look for the person with the scar shaped like a fishhook behind their left ear." Kimmy's blood went cold. A fishhook scar behind the left ear. She'd seen that scar, recently, on Silas. Her mind raced. She thought back to every conversation, every moment. The way he'd appeared so conveniently after Rose's death. The way he knew so much about the consortium. The way he'd arranged the meeting with Webb, then Webb had died. What if it was all a performance? What if Silas was? The gunshot shattered the thought. Mrs. Yates jerked backward, a red bloom spreading across her chest. She collapsed. Kimmy dropped to her knees beside the old woman, pressing her hands against the wound, but there was so much blood. Mrs. Yates's eyes were wide, frightened. "Run," she whispered. "Run." Footsteps outside, running away. Kimmy looked up and saw lying on the ground near the door a hat, a rancher's hat, the same style Silas wore. She grabbed it, turning it over in shaking hands, but the hat band was newer than Silas's worn leather, and inside the crown, burned into the leather, were initials E.V. Ezekiel Voss. Her world tilted. Either this was Voss's doing, or someone was framing him. Either way, she now had evidence. She grabbed the diary and the hat, then ran. Kimmy rode through darkness with Mrs. Yates's blood on her hands and Rose's diary clutched against her chest. The horse sensed her panic and ran harder, hooves striking the hard earth like drum beats. Behind her, Mesquite Springs shrank into a scatter of lights, and ahead lay only the vast emptiness of the desert and questions she had no answers for. The fishhook scar, behind the left ear. Silas had that scar. She'd seen it once when he'd pushed his hair back, a curved white line against sun-browned skin. He'd told her it came from the day Aida and Morning Dove died, when he'd tried to save them from the fire. A piece of burning wood had struck him. But what if that was a lie? What if everything was a lie? She pushed the horse harder, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that she was running again. Running like she always did when the world got too sharp, too dangerous, too close. But this time, she wasn't running from strangers. She was running from someone she'd almost started to trust. Almost. The farmhouse appeared through the darkness, lamplight glowing in the windows. Kimmy pulled her horse to a stop at the edge of the property, suddenly uncertain. If Silas was the killer, riding straight to him was suicide. But if he wasn't, if someone was framing him, then he was the only ally she had. The front door opened. Silas stepped onto the porch, a rifle in his hands, not pointing it at her, but ready. When he saw her, his posture changed. "Kimmy," relief flooded his voice. "Thank God. I heard a gunshot from town. I thought—" He stopped, seeing her face. "What happened?" She dismounted, but kept the horse between them. "Mrs. Yates is dead." His face went pale. "What? Someone shot her. At the church, right after she gave me Rose's diary. Are you hurt?" "No." He started toward her, but she held up a hand. "Don't." Silas stopped. In the lamplight from the house she could see confusion in his eyes and something else. Hurt. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "Show me your left ear." "What?" "Your left ear. Show me." Understanding dawned slowly. He set the rifle down carefully and pushed his hair back, revealing the scar, the fishhook shape white against his skin. Rose wrote something in her diary. Kimimila said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. She said to look for someone with a scar shaped like a fishhook behind their left ear. That person killed her. The silence stretched between them like wire pulled taut. "And you think that's me," Silas said finally. "I don't know what to think." "Yes, you do." His voice was flat. "You've been waiting for this. Waiting for proof that I'm just another white man who can't be trusted. Well, congratulations. You found your excuse." "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" He took a step forward, and she tensed. "From the moment you arrived, you've been looking for reasons not to trust me. Every kindness I offered you questioned. Every truth I told you doubted. Because it's easier to believe I'm the enemy than to believe someone might actually want to help you. You were part of the consortium. You admitted it. And I left. I've been fighting them for a year. Or you've been playing a long game, getting close to Rose, getting close to me, waiting for the right moment." Silas flinched as if she'd struck him. "If I wanted you dead, Kimimila, you'd already be dead. I've had 100 chances. Why would I wait? I don't know. But I know you have that scar. And I know Mrs. Yates was murdered right after she told me about it. So was I at the church. Someone left your hat there." He stared at her, then let out a bitter laugh. "My hat? Of course." He walked to the porch railing, gripping it hard. "How many ranchers in this territory wear hats like mine? 50, 100. But you see one hat and decide I'm a murderer." "Then explain the scar." "I already did. The night Aida died." "Prove it." He turned to face her, and she saw something break in his eyes. "I can't. There were no witnesses, just me and the bodies of my family." His voice cracked. "But if you need me to prove I'm not a killer, then you never trusted me at all. And maybe Rose was wrong about you." The words stung more than Kimimila expected. "What does that mean?" "She said you were strong, brave, but she also said you were scared, that you built walls so high no one could reach you. I thought she was being pessimistic." He shook his head. "Turns out she was right. Silas, go." He picked up his rifle. "Take whatever you need and go. If you think I'm capable of murder, then you shouldn't be here. Where's Tyen?" "Asleep, safe, unlike everyone else who gets close to me." Kimimila wanted to argue, but what could she say? That she was sorry for accusing him, that she wanted to believe him, but didn't know how. That trust was a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Before she could find words, movement from inside the house. Tyen appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Why are you fighting?" he asked, his small voice cutting through the tension. Neither adult answered. Tyen walked to Silas and took his hand. "She came back," the boy said. "She promised she would, and she did." Silas's expression softened slightly. "Go back to bed, Tyen." "Not until you stop being angry." "I'm not angry." "Yes, you are, and so is she." Tyen looked at Kimimila. "My father used to say, anger is just fear wearing a mask. What are you both scared of? Out of the mouths of children." Kimimila felt something loosen in her chest. Tyen was right. She was scared. Scared of trusting Silas and being betrayed. Scared of caring about him and losing him. Scared of building something only to watch it crumble. "I'm scared of being wrong," she admitted quietly. Silas's jaw worked. Finally he spoke. "So am I." They looked at each other across the space that had opened between them, and for a moment Kimimila saw past her fear to the man standing there, tired, grieving, trying to do right in a world that punished goodness. "I'm sorry," she said, "for assuming, for not giving you the benefit of doubt." "And I'm sorry," Silas replied, "for expecting you to trust easily when the world has given you every reason not to." Tyen squeezed Silas's hand. "Now hug," he instructed. "Tyen," Silas started. "Hug, like family does." It was awkward at first, the two adults moving together stiffly, But then Kimimila felt Silas's arms around her solid and warm, and she let herself lean into it, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what safety felt like. When they pulled apart, Tyen was smiling. "Better," he announced. "Now we can solve problems." They sat at the kitchen table while Tyen made coffee, the boy insisting he knew how. Kimimila laid out Rose's diary, and together they read the final entries. Rose had been meticulous. She'd documented every attempt by the consortium to buy her land. Every threat, veiled and direct. Every strange occurrence from cattle found dead to fences cut. And running through it all, a growing certainty that someone close to her was betraying information. "She suspected everyone," Silas said, reading over Kimimila's shoulder. "Drummond, obviously, but also Sheriff Voss, her lawyer. Even me for a while. She crossed your name out," Kimimila pointed, "2 weeks before she died." "Why, because—" Kimimila flipped forward a few pages. "Here, she writes, 'Silas brought medicine for my cough today. Refused payment. When I asked why he bothered with an old woman, he said Aita had taught him that kindness doesn't need a reason. No man who speaks of his dead wife with that kind of tenderness could be cruel.'" Silas's hand trembled slightly as he touched the words. "I remember that day. She was so sick. I thought she might not make it through winter, but she did, until someone pushed her into a well." They kept reading. The final entry was the one Mrs. Yates had shown her, the fishhook scar. Kimimila read it aloud, then looked at Silas. "How common is that scar? I don't know, but it's not unique. Happens when someone falls from a horse and catches their ear on the saddle horn." He paused. "Or when a piece of burning wood strikes you just right. We need to find out who else has it. And how do we do that? Ask everyone in town to show us their ears." Tyen, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Chief Nahuel would know." Both adults turned to look at him. "Why would the chief know?" Kimimila asked. "Because Apache noticed scars. My father taught me. Scars tell stories. The warriors memorize them." He took a sip of coffee and made a face. "This is terrible." Despite everything, Kimimila smiled. "You're right, on both counts." They rode out before dawn, all 3 of them, 40 miles to San Carlos Reservation. The journey took most of the day, and they spoke little, conserving energy for what lay ahead. Chief Nahuel was waiting when they arrived, as if he'd known they were coming. Perhaps he had. The old chief had always possessed an uncanny awareness of the world around him. He invited them into his home, a small adobe structure that smelled of sage and tobacco. Tyen immediately curled up in a corner and fell asleep exhausted from the ride. Nahuel watched him with gentle eyes. "Kuruk's boy has grown," he observed. "He's strong," Silas said, "like his father. And stubborn, also like his father." Nahuel turned his attention to Kimimila. "You carry trouble with you." "I seem to, yes." "Tell me." She did. Everything. Rose's death, the diary, the scar, Mrs. Yates's murder. Nahuel listened without interruption, his face grave. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "The scar you describe," he said finally. "I know 3 men who carry it. One is Silas. The others are both white men from Mesquite Springs." "Who?" "One is a rancher named Henry Pike. Good man. Helped Apache during the hard winter 5 years ago. Shared his grain when he had little to spare." Kimimila remembered Pike. He'd been the one to warn them about the town meeting. "And the other," Nahuel's expression darkened. "Sheriff Ezekiel Voss." The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through everything. Kimimila exchanged glances with Silas. "Voss?" Silas breathed. "Of course." "You suspect him?" Nahuel asked. "I don't know, but it would make sense. He's the one investigating Rose's death. If he's the killer, he could control the narrative, make sure evidence disappears." "There's more," Nahuel said. "Something you should know about Voss. He's been sheriff for 30 years, but before that he was a deputy. And 30 years ago, There was an incident. What kind of incident? A white trader was killed. Samuel Wade. They said it was a hunting accident, but there were whispers. Some said it was murder, that someone in authority ordered it done. Nahuel looked at Kimimila. Your father. The room seemed to tilt. Kimimila gripped the edge of her chair. Voss killed my father. I can't prove it, but the timing is suspicious. Samuel was trying to establish a trade post on the border, a place where Apache and whites could meet peacefully. Some people didn't want that, didn't want Apache to have any foothold, any legitimacy. Who would have given the order? That I don't know. But if Voss was involved, he was following instructions. Deputies don't act alone. Silas leaned forward. What if it's bigger than the consortium? What if there's someone else pulling the strings? Like who? Railroad companies, mining interests, anyone who wants control of the territory. He looked at Nahuel. Has there been unusual activity, surveyors' maps being drawn? Now that you mention it, yes. Last year men came through, said they were mapping for a new railroad line to Mexico. They were particularly interested in water sources. The pieces were falling into place. Not a simple land grab by local ranchers, but something larger, more calculated. The consortium was just the local face of a bigger operation. We need proof, Kimimila said. Real evidence, not just suspicions. Then you need to make Voss reveal himself, Nahuel said. Set a trap. How? The old chief smiled slightly. By giving him what he wants. A chance to silence you permanently. The plan was dangerous, foolish even, but it was all they had. They would return to Mesquite Springs and announce publicly that Kimimila was selling the land, a public auction in 3 days, open to all bidders. This would draw out the real powers behind the consortium, force them to show their hand, and in that chaos, with everyone watching, Voss would have to act carefully, unless he was desperate enough to be reckless. You're betting he'll make a mistake, Silas said as they prepared to leave the reservation. That's a lot of faith in his incompetence. I'm betting he's been getting away with murder for 30 years because no one challenged him, Kimimila corrected. But now, with witnesses, with scrutiny, he'll panic. And if he doesn't, then we'll have to improvise. Nahuel provided them with something else. 3 warriors, young and strong, who would position themselves around Mesquite Springs during the auction. Hidden, watching. If things went wrong, they would intervene. You've done enough for us, Silas said. This isn't for you, Nahuel replied. This is for Karuk, for Aita, for all the Apache who died because men like Voss chose profit over people. He placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. And it's for you, because you honored my people when others didn't. Word of the auction spread quickly. By the time they returned to Mesquite Springs, the town was buzzing. Ranchers spoke in excited clusters. Drummond walked the streets like a man who'd already won, and Voss watched everything with careful eyes. Kimimila posted notices herself, nailing them to every public building. Land auction, Rose Hartwell Estate, including all water rights. Saturday, noon, highest bidder takes all. People stared as she worked, some with curiosity, others with open hostility, but no one tried to stop her. Pike found her outside the general store. You're really selling? He asked quietly. That's the plan. Folks are saying you're finally showing sense, getting out while you can. Folks say a lot of things. Pike studied her face. You're up to something. Maybe. He almost smiled. Your aunt would be proud. She never backed down from a fight either. He tipped his hat. Be careful, Miss Kimimila. The people who want that land play for keeps. After he left, Silas emerged from the shadows where he'd been watching. Pike's a good man, he said. How do you know? Because he could have told Drummond about our plan, but he didn't. Maybe he will. He won't. Silas sounded certain. There are more good people in this town than you think. They're just scared. Fear makes people silent. What makes them brave? Seeing someone else be brave first. The night before the auction, Kimimila couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch watching stars wheel overhead and thought about all the paths that had led her here. Her father's death, her mother's death, Rose's murder. Every loss, every betrayal, every moment she'd chosen survival over trust. Footsteps behind her. Silas carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might be awake," he said, offering one. She took it gratefully. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "1,000 of them." "We can still walk away. Take Tyen and disappear. There's no shame in choosing life over justice." "Isn't there?" Silas leaned against the railing. "I spent 5 years thinking about justice, what it meant, whether it mattered. After Aida and Morning Dove died, I wanted someone to pay. Needed it. Spent everything I had trying to find who gave the order for that raid." He took a sip of coffee. "Never did find them. And somewhere along the way, I realized justice wasn't bringing them back. It was just keeping me angry." "So you gave up?" "No. I changed what I was fighting for. Stopped fighting for revenge and started fighting for something better, for Tyen, for a world where kids like him don't have to grow up afraid." Kimimila thought about Tyen asleep inside, about the way he trusted so easily, loved so freely, about how that innocence was both precious and terrifying. "What if we lose tomorrow?" she asked. "Then we lose. But at least we'll lose trying." She looked at him, this man who'd lost everything and somehow kept going, who'd chosen kindness when the world offered him every excuse for cruelty. "Silas, yeah, I'm sorry I doubted you. About the scar. About everything." "You had reason to. Not good enough reason." He set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "Kimimila, you've spent your whole life being betrayed by people who should have protected you. Your doubt isn't a flaw. It's survival. Don't apologize for that." "But I hurt you." "Yeah, you did." He smiled slightly. "But I've been hurt before. I survived." She wanted to say more, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away, didn't make it into something it wasn't, just held her hand and looked up at the stars with her. "Just sit down," he said softly. "What? That's what I said to you the first day, when your horse spooked. Just sit down. But I've been thinking about what it really means." He squeezed her hand gently. "It doesn't mean give up. It means stop fighting alone. Sit down beside someone. Let them carry part of the weight." "I don't know how." "Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together." They stood like that until the sky began to lighten, holding hands and holding hope. Saturday arrived with cloudless skies and gathering heat. By noon, Main Street was packed. Ranchers, townspeople, even some Apache from the reservation. Nahuel had come along with a dozen others, ostensibly to observe, but Kimimila knew the warriors were among them ready. A makeshift platform had been erected in front of the town hall. Drummond stood on it, looking pleased. Beside him, Sheriff Voss scanned the crowd with careful eyes. Other consortium members clustered nearby. Kimimila climbed onto the platform, and the crowd fell silent. She'd dressed carefully that morning, Apache clothing but with her father's old leather vest, a visible reminder that she was both worlds, neither fully one nor the other. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice carrying. "As you know, I'm selling the Rose Hartwell estate. All land buildings and, most importantly, all rights to the underground spring." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Before we begin bidding, I have something to say." She pulled out Rose's diary. "My aunt kept careful records of every conversation, every threat, every attempt to force her off her land. It's all here." Drummond's smile faltered. "What's your point?" he demanded. "My point is that this land has cost too many lives. My father 30 years ago, my aunt 3 weeks ago, Garrett Webb, Mrs. Opal Yates." She looked directly at Voss. "All murdered, all because someone wanted control of the water." Voss's face remained impassive, but she saw his hand drift toward his gun. "That's a serious accusation," he said calmly. "You got proof?" "I do, actually." Kimimila opened the diary. Rose wrote everything down, including the fact that the killer has a specific scar, shaped like a fish hook, behind the left ear. The crowd stirred. Several people unconsciously touched their own ears. Now that's interesting, Silas said, stepping onto the platform, because I have that scar. So do you? Sheriff. And so does Henry Pike. Pike, standing in the crowd, looked startled. What's this about? He called out. This is about the fact that someone has been murdering people to control this land, Silas continued, and using a scar that multiple people have to throw suspicion around. Drummond laughed. This is ridiculous. You're pointing fingers at everyone. Not everyone. Kimimila met Voss's eyes. Sheriff, where were you the night Mrs. Yates was killed? Home, asleep. Anyone verify that? I live alone. Convenient. What about the night Rose died, making rounds like I do every night? Also convenient. She pulled out another paper. I found this in Rose's things, a letter from the Territorial Land Office from 30 years ago. It mentions a deputy named Ezekiel Voss being present when my father's death was investigated. The same Ezekiel Voss who declared it a hunting accident, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Voss's expression remained carefully neutral. Ancient history, he said, and none of it proves anything. You're making wild accusations based on a scar that half the men in this territory probably have. Then let's talk about recent history, Kimimila continued, about how you've been investigating Rose's death for 3 weeks and conveniently found nothing. About how every witness who could testify ends up dead. Tragic coincidences, Voss said smoothly. I've filed reports on all of them. Reports that lead nowhere? Because there's nowhere to lead. You're seeing conspiracies where there are only accidents and bad luck. The crowd was uncertain now, looking between Kimimila and Voss. Drummond stepped forward. This is slander. Sheriff Voss has served this town faithfully for 30 years, unless you have actual proof. We do, Silas interrupted. He pulled something from his pocket. A small device, one of the new recording cylinders that had started appearing in territorial offices. Garrett Webb wasn't just selling information, he was recording it. Before he died, he gave this to someone he trusted, someone who brought it to me. Voss's composure slipped just for a second. That's illegal, inadmissible. Maybe in a court, Silas said. But we're not in court, we're in the town square, and these people deserve to hear the truth. He activated the device. Webb's voice, tinny but clear, filled the air. Voss is the one who handles the dirty work. Has been for 30 years. The railroad pays him through shell companies, makes it look clean. He killed Samuel Wade back in '56, set it up as a hunting accident, and Rose Hartwell 3 weeks ago, pushed her in that well himself. I know because he told me when he was drunk, bragged about it. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Voss's hand moved toward his gun. That's a forgery. Webb was a liar and a drunk. Webb is also dead, Kimimila said. Shot right after making that recording. Convenient timing, Sheriff. Nahuel stepped forward from the crowd flanked by his warriors. I have more evidence. Documents from the railroad company. Payment records. One name appears consistently, E. Voss. Voss looked around, seeing the crowd turning against him, seeing the Apache warriors closing in, seeing his carefully constructed life crumbling. You can't prove anything, he said, but his voice lacked conviction now. We can prove enough, Silas said. Federal marshals are already on their way. They'll do a proper investigation. Unless, he paused, unless you want to tell your side of the story first, while you still can. Voss's facade shattered. His hand went for his gun fast for a man his age. Nobody's investigating anything. He pulled the weapon and the crowd scattered. I've protected this town for 30 years, done what needed doing, removed obstacles, kept order, and this is the thanks I get. You murdered innocent people, Kimimila said. I eliminated problems Samuel Wade was going to ruin everything, give Apache equal rights to land. Rose was going to give away water that should have made this town rich. They were obstacles to progress. They were people, Silas said quietly. They were in the way. Voss was fully unhinged, now 30 years of secrets pouring out. The railroad offered real money, real development. All I had to do was clear a few inconvenient people. A hunting accident here, a tragic fall there. Nobody questioned it, nobody cared, until now. He swung the gun toward Kimimila, but before he could fire, his eyes went wide. He looked down at a small dart protruding from his neck. One of Nahuel's warriors had used a blowgun. Voss stumbled, the gun falling from his hand. "What did you?" "A sedative," Nahuel said calmly. "We came prepared." Voss collapsed to his knees, then forward onto his face. Pike and several townsmen rushed forward to restrain him. "It's over," Pike said, looking at Kimimila. "We all heard it, every word. Railroad companies, mining syndicates, they've been buying up this territory piece by piece for 20 years, and they pay well for people who can help them." The admission hung in the air. Voss seemed to realize he'd said too much, but now that he'd started something, broke loose. "Samuel Wade figured it out 30 years ago. He was going to expose the whole thing, so I was told to handle it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Hunting accident, simple, clean." Kimimila felt her world narrow to a point. Her father, murdered by this man. And Rose, she managed. Rose was a problem. Wouldn't sell, wouldn't be quiet. Kept threatening to give water away for free. That would have ruined everything. So yes, I killed her. Pushed her in that well and listened to her scream. Didn't take long. Gasps from the crowd. Drummond had gone pale. "You said it was an accident. You said—" "I said what I needed to say. Same as with Webb. Same as with that meddling old woman Yates." Voss pulled his gun now, not pointing it at anyone specific, just holding it ready. "And now I'll say this. Anyone who wants to walk away from here alive better start walking." But before Voss fully collapsed from the sedative in his final moments of consciousness, he made a desperate lunge toward the nearest person, Tyen, who had moved too close to the platform. His hand grabbed the boy's arm. Even drugged Voss was strong enough to pull Tyen in front of him as a shield. "No," Silas shouted. Voss's movements were sluggish now, the sedative working through his system, but he still had the boy. "Let him go," Kimimila said, her voice deadly calm. "You're finished. Don't make it worse." Tyen didn't panic. His father had trained him for moments like this. The boy went completely limp, dead weight, making himself harder to hold. Then he whispered something only Voss could hear. "My father taught me that scared men make mistakes. You're making one now." The words, the calm tone broke through Voss's drug-addled fury. For just a second he loosened his grip, confused by this child who wasn't afraid. That second was enough. Silas moved fast, grabbing Tyen and yanking him free. Pike and 2 other men caught Voss as he felt the sedative finally taking full effect. Silas held Tyen tight, checking him for injuries. "You okay?" "I did what you taught me," Tyen said. "Stayed calm, waited for the right moment. You scared me half to death. But I'm okay." The boy hugged him back. "We're okay." Kimimila stood watching as Voss was subdued. The sheriff who'd protected killers for 30 years, who'd murdered her father, who'd killed Rose, all in service of distant powers who'd paid him to make problems disappear. Pike helped haul Voss to his feet. The sheriff's face was bleeding, his shirt torn. He looked old suddenly, defeated. "It won't matter," he said to Kimimila. "You think this changes anything? The railroad still wants this land. They'll send someone else, someone smarter. You can't win." "Maybe not," Kimimila said. "But at least we'll lose honestly." Kimimila stepped closer to Voss, her voice low and dangerous. "One more thing. The piece of my mother's dress. The one you left in the well with Rose. Why?" Voss's eyes flickered with something that might have been regret or just exhaustion. "Your aunt kept it hidden for 15 years. Proof that your mother didn't die of fever like the reservation doctor claimed." He spat blood onto the ground. "The doctor worked for the railroad. They paid him to poison Apache who were causing problems. Your mother was teaching people to fight for their land rights, so they eliminated her." Kimimila felt the world tilt. Rose knew. Rose suspected. She kept that dress piece as evidence, was going to give it to you when you came back, show you the truth. But I couldn't let that happen. So I made sure it went into the well with her, thought it would disappear forever." He laughed bitterly. "Guess I was wrong about that too." Silas put a steadying hand on Kimimila's shoulder as Pike pulled Voss away toward the makeshift jail. "Your mother," Silas said quietly, "she was murdered too." "Yes." Kimimila's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "And now I know." The aftermath took weeks to sort through. Federal marshals came from Tucson to handle Voss's arrest. The investigation uncovered documents linking a railroad company to bribes paid to local officials, including the previous sheriff who'd employed Voss 30 years ago. Drummond and the other consortium members claimed ignorance, said they'd been duped. Most people believed them. The land auction never happened. Instead, Kimimila did what Rose had planned all along. She established the property as a water cooperative. Free access for anyone who needed it, Apache or white, rancher or farmer. The only rule: take what you need, leave what others need. Some called it naive, foolish, a waste of valuable resources. But something strange happened. People started cooperating. Ranchers helped Apache dig irrigation channels. Apache taught ranchers how to find underground water sources. The land around Mesquite Springs became greener, more productive. Not overnight, but gradually. Silas stayed. He never asked for claim to the land, never expected anything in return. He just kept fixing things, building things, making things better. Tyan thrived. The boy who'd been too Apache for the white world and too white raised for easy acceptance in the Apache world found his place between both. Other children followed his example. Slowly, walls came down. 6 months later, on a warm evening, as summer gave way to autumn, Kimimila stood by the spring they dug up and made accessible to all. The water flowed clear and cold, a small miracle in the desert. Footsteps behind her. She knew without turning it was Silas. "The new irrigation channels are working," he said. "Pike says his crops are the best he's seen in 20 years. Good." Nahuel sent word. 3 more families want to start farms on the border, cooperative style like here. That's good too. Silas moved to stand beside her, looking down at the water. "There's going to be a dance in town next week. Community celebration. Pike specifically asked if you were coming. I don't dance. Neither do I. But we could sit together, watch other people make fools of themselves." She smiled despite herself. "Just sit down. Just sit down." They were quiet for a while, listening to the water flow. Finally, Kimimila spoke. "I've been thinking about what my father tried to build, that trade post, a place between two worlds. And I think maybe we've built it, not the way he planned, but built it anyway. You think he'd be proud? I think he'd be surprised we survived this long." Silas laughed. "Fair enough." She turned to face him. "I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "All right. Why did you stay? Really? You could have left months ago, gone somewhere easier, safer. Why stay here with all the complications and danger and—" She gestured at the farmhouse in the distance. "And me?" Silas was quiet for a long time. When he answered, his voice was soft. "Because for the first time since Aida died, I felt like I was building something instead of just surviving. Because Tyan needs a home, and because—" He paused. "Because you remind me that broken things can still be strong, that walls can become bridges, and that maybe, just maybe, people like us deserve a second chance." Something in Kimimila's chest cracked open, not breaking, opening. "Silas, yeah, I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." She reached for his hand, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear, just a choice made freely. They stood like that as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land they'd fought to protect. In the distance, smoke rose from chimneys both in town and on the reservation. 2 worlds, still separate in many ways, but learning to coexist. Learning to share water and land and hope. It wasn't perfect. There was still prejudice, still fear, still people who resented change. But it was better than it had been. And maybe that was enough. The dance came a week later. The whole town turned out, along with Apache families from the reservation. Someone had strung lights between buildings, and a makeshift band played fiddle music that wasn't half bad. Kimimila wore a dress Rose had left her. Simple, practical, but nicer than her usual clothes. Silas wore his cleanest shirt and actually combed his hair. Tyan laughed at both of them. "You look like you're going to church," he said. "Behave," Silas told him, but he was smiling. They walked to the town hall together, the 3 of them. People stared, of course. They always would. But now some of the stares were curious rather than hostile. Some were even friendly. Pike met them at the door. "Miss Kimimila, Silas, young Tyen." He tipped his hat to each. "Glad you could make it. There's food inside, and I heard someone say they brought apple pie." "Race you!" Tyen took off running. Inside the hall was transformed. Decorations hung from the rafters, tables groaned with food, and people mingled in ways Kimimila had never seen. Apache families chatting with ranchers, children playing together regardless of whose blood ran in their veins. It wasn't paradise. She saw sidelong glances, heard whispered comments. Change was slow and incomplete. But it was happening. Music started up and couples began to dance. Silas looked at her. "Ready to sit down?" he asked. "Ready." They found seats along the wall where they could watch everything. Tyen brought them plates of food, then disappeared to play with other children. For a while they just observed. The swirl of skirts, the stomp of boots, the laughter. Then Silas stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me." Kimimila stared at him. "I told you I don't dance." "And I said we'd just sit down. But I'm changing the plan." His eyes were warm. "Dance with me. Not because anyone expects it. Not because it's required. But because we survived. Because we won. Because we deserve one moment of joy." She looked at his outstretched hand, at his hopeful face, at the people around them who were pretending not to watch. And she took his hand. "I don't know the steps," she warned. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." They moved onto the floor, and Silas put one hand at her waist, kept the other holding hers. The music was lively, but they moved slowly, finding their own rhythm. "Everyone's staring," Kimimila said. "Let them." "We probably look ridiculous." "Definitely." But she found herself laughing. When was the last time she'd laughed like this? Free and unguarded. The song ended, and another began. They kept dancing. At some point, others joined them, Apache and white moving together in patterns that weren't quite traditional for either culture, but somehow worked anyway. Nahuel appeared dancing with a widow from town. Pike danced with an Apache woman who made him look clumsy. Tyen danced with a little girl, both of them giggling. The world hadn't changed completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for this moment, there was music and light and the possibility that enemies could become neighbors, that neighbors could become friends, that friends could become family. As the evening wound down, Kimimila and Silas found themselves back on the edges, watching Tyen chase other children. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "This peace?" "Probably not. People being people, something will go wrong eventually." "That's pessimistic, but realistic." He bumped her shoulder gently. "The question isn't whether it lasts forever. It's whether it lasts long enough to teach people it's possible, that peace is an option, not just a dream. And you think we've done that. I think we've started. That's more than most people can say." Tyen ran up to them, breathless and happy. "Can we stay longer, please?" Silas looked at Kimimila. She nodded. "A little longer," he told Tyen. "Then home." "Home," Tyen repeated, testing the word. "I like that." "Me too," Kimimila said softly. "Me too." They rode back under stars, Tyen asleep in Silas's lap. The farmhouse came into view, lamplight in the windows that Kimimila had left burning. "Thank you," she said as they dismounted. "For what? For not giving up on me, even when I gave you reasons to. You never gave me reasons. You gave me challenges. There's a difference." He carried Tyen inside and laid him in bed. When he came back out, Kimimila was still on the porch. "Silas, yeah, I'm not good at this, at trusting, at believing things can work out, at letting people close. I know. But I want to try, with you, with Tyen, with all of this." She gestured at the farmhouse, the land, the vast desert beyond. "I want to build something that lasts." He moved closer. "So do I." "It won't be easy. Nothing worth having is." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. They stood like that, looking out at land that had cost so much blood but promised so much hope. "Rose would be proud," Silas said. She'd say we were fools, probably both. They went inside together, closing the door behind them. Outside, the desert breathed, the spring flowed, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And in a small farmhouse at the edge of Mesquite Springs, where two worlds met and sometimes collided but increasingly coexisted, three people who'd lost everything found something worth keeping: a home, a family, a future. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And sometimes that was enough. Epilogue, 10 years later. The sign at the property line read, Hartwell's Spring Station. Below that, water free to all, established 1887. The farmhouse had grown, additional rooms, a larger barn, irrigation channels that reached for miles. The spring itself had been developed into a proper well system, serving not just the immediate area, but farms and ranches for 20 miles in every direction. Kimimila stood on the porch watching riders approach. Delegations coming for the monthly meeting. Apache and white discussing water rights, land use, trade agreements. It had become routine now, expected, almost normal. Silas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. His hair was graying at the temples, now his face more lined, but his eyes were still bright. "Everyone here?" he asked. "Not yet. Tyen's group is running late." Tyen was 20 now, tall and strong, working as a liaison between the reservation and the territorial government. The first Apache to hold such a position. He'd helped establish 3 more cooperative water stations across the territory, each modeled on Hartwell's Spring. A rider crested the hill, not Tyen, but a young woman Kimimila recognized. Mail courier from town. "Letter for you, Mrs. Grayson," the courier said, handing over an envelope. Kimimila took it, still not quite used to the name, even after 8 years of marriage. The letter was from the territorial capital, official seal. She opened it and read quickly, then handed it to Silas. "They're making it official," she said. "Hartwell Spring is now federally recognized as neutral territory, protected status, can't be sold or seized." Silas read the letter twice. "Rose's dream," he said quietly. "Finally real." "Our dream," Kimimila corrected. "Hers, mine, yours, everyone who fought for it." The federal investigation into the railroad company had taken 3 years, but the results were finally in. 3 executives indicted for conspiracy to commit murder, land fraud, and racketeering. The trial would drag on for years more, but the precedent was set. Corporations couldn't kill their way to profit. Not anymore. Drummond cleared of murder charges, but humiliated by his association with Voss, and the consortium sold his ranch within a year of the trial. Some said he moved to California and drank himself to death. Others claimed he found religion and spent his final years doing penance. Kimimila didn't care either way. He'd been a pawn, nothing more. Henry Pike became the first mayor of Mesquite Springs who actively worked with the Apache reservation. Under his leadership, the town transformed from a place of suspicion and violence into a model of cooperation. He served 3 terms before retiring, citing his age and a desire to spend more time with his grandchildren. The piece of her mother's dress, that fragment of Apache weaving that had survived 15 years and revealed so much pain, Kimimila buried beside Rose's grave. She placed it in a small cedar box, along with her father's old compass and a lock of Rose's hair. A marker stood between Rose's headstone and the space where Kimimila would eventually be laid to rest. In memory of those who fought for justice, Samuel Wade, Aida, Mourning Dove, and all Apache who died for the right to exist in peace. Some wounds never fully healed, but at least now the dead could rest. More riders appeared. The monthly meeting would be starting soon. Kimimila went inside to prepare coffee and food, the rituals of hospitality she'd learned from both cultures. Silas followed her, catching her hand. "You know what this means, right? The federal protection. We can't be forced off. More than that, this can be a model. Other places can follow what we built. Cooperation instead of conquest. Maybe? Or maybe we're just a strange exception, a brief moment of sanity in an insane world. Even if we are, that's something. That's proof it's possible. She squeezed his hand. Ever the optimist. Someone has to be. The meeting went well. Agreements were reached, disputes settled, plans made. When everyone left, the sun was setting, painting familiar colors across familiar land. Kimimila and Silas sat on the porch as they did most evenings. Tyan would be home soon. Dinner would be simple but good. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight there was peace. "Just sitting down?" Silas asked, echoing their old conversation. "Just sitting down," Kimimila confirmed. "Right where I belong." And under the wide Arizona sky, where the water ran clear and two worlds had learned to share the same earth, they sat together as twilight deepened from violet to indigo, and the first stars appeared like promises kept. Not perfect, never perfect, but home. The end.